On this episode of Classic Gaming Quarterly, the RetroTINK 2X Pro is a plug-and-play set-it-and-forget-it solution, allowing you to properly display SD content on your HDTV. So earlier this month, I bought the RetroTINK 2X Pro, and after playing with it for about a week and a half, I have to say that I think this is the most practical solution for anybody who's just looking to play their old video game systems on like their living room HDTV. So what is a RetroTINK 2X or the 2X Pro? These are basic video upscalers that take SD video over composite S video or component, upscales it to 480p, and digitizes it along with the audio, outputting HDMI, which you can then plug into an HDTV. As of the making of this video, you can still get both the RetroTINK 2X and the 2X Pro. And once I get done like describing what this thing does, I'll tell you what the differences are so you can kind of make a decision as to which one you want to get. I only have the 2X Pro, so that's what I'm going to be showing in this video. But the original 2X has like 90% of the functionality of the 2X Pro. When you get the 2X Pro, it comes in a little baggie, and the only thing that you get with it is a micro USB cable, which is how it's powered. The Pro comes in a nice injection molded case, and you have video and audio inputs on the front and on the left side. On the front, you've got your two audio inputs, and then you've got your three component video inputs, but the Y input for component doubles as the composite video input. And then over on the left, you've got your S video. There really aren't too many things that you can change settings-wise on the 2X Pro, but just to go over them quickly, you've got two switches on the right-hand side. One of them just puts it into either line 2X mode or pass-through mode. So if you use pass-through mode, all it's going to do is take the input signal and digitize it, so there's no deinterlacing or upscaling done. That's really not something that most of you are ever going to need to mess with. The other switch you may have cause to mess with on occasion, that's the comb filter switch, which only applies to composite video, but just basically it dictates how the 2X separates the chroma and luma signals in the composite video. The two options are retro and auto, and basically what you need to know is if you're playing an old 240p game like a Nintendo game or a Sega Genesis game, you want to have it in the retro position. And if you're playing a 480i game, like maybe on a Sega Saturn or a PlayStation, depends on the game, or you're watching 480i video content, you're going to want to have it in the auto setting. On the back, you've got two buttons. The first button is just the input select, so that's quite obvious what it does. The other button is a filter selection button. You have three filter options with the Pro. One is just the normal setting, which doesn't apply any kind of filter. So that one's going to be, I guess, the sharpest setting, but sort of the most pixelated and blocky. You can also select a smooth filter, and don't sleep on the smooth filter. I've always had a negative association with smooth filters because I think of like an HQ2X filter on an emulator, which really just overdoes it. But with an application like this, there are times when you may want to use a smooth filter. First of all, NES games don't look bad at all with the smooth filter turned on. It does help to kind of mitigate some of the signal noise a little bit. But if you're playing a 480i game, like a PlayStation 2 game, I think it actually helps make it look a little bit better. It gets rid of some of the jitter in the picture, and it just smooths out the edges just enough to make it seem like it's a little bit higher resolution than it is. I personally also like turning on the smoothing filter if I'm using the 2X to watch video content, which we'll talk about more later. The third filter setting you have is a Scanline Filter, which is new to the 2X Pro. I personally don't care for the way it looks, but the Scanline Filter was one of the most requested features that people wanted to see added to the 2X Pro, and you've got it. And if Scanlines are something that you're into, there you go. The only other two things on the back of the 2X Pro, you have a full-size HDMI out, and you have a micro USB power input. Now, both the RetroTINK 2X and the 2X Pro do not come with a power supply. They just come with a micro USB cable. You can use just any phone charger you might have laying around to power the 2X, but it actually only needs about 500 milliamps to run, which means that you can plug your 2X into an available USB port on your TV if you have one. It's nice being able to plug it into your TV because that means that when you turn off your TV, it turns off the RetroTINK 2X because this does not have a power switch on it. Now, perhaps above and beyond anything else, the most important feature that I think that the 2X has is the fact that it introduces no input lag whatsoever. Unlike some of the cheap upscalers you'll see on, say, Amazon and whatnot, that will take an RGB input and output HDMI. Some of those are so bad as to be virtually unplayable. And lastly, if you're watching this video and you're not in North America, the 2X and 2X Pro are both compatible with NTSC, PAL, and CCAM, so you should be able to use it anywhere around the world. To go over the differences quickly between the original RetroTINK 2X and the 2X Pro, first and foremost is the price. The original RetroTINK 2X, which is still available at the moment, is $89, while the Pro is $129. The RetroTINK 2X Pro comes with a nice injection molded case, and with that, both the input select buttons and the filter button, video filter buttons, have been moved to the outside so that you can easily depress them, whereas with the original RetroTINK 2X, you kind of had to reach your finger underneath the acrylic to push them. The other things you get with the 2X Pro, you get auto detection of NTSC, PAL, or CCAM. And for some people, perhaps the most important addition for the 2X Pro is that now you have the Scanline filter, which the original 2X does not have. So now we'll just go through some different uses for the RetroTINK 2X. The first thing that popped into my mind for some reason was using this to play RF-only consoles. Like maybe you still have your old Atari or Intellivision or ColecoVision laying around, and you have no way to play that on your HDTV. Well, as long as you have a VCR or a DVD recorder, you can plug those things into the antenna input on those devices and then plug the composite or S-video output into the RetroTINK 2X Pro. I don't have an Intellivision or a ColecoVision laying around, so I just used my NES along with an RF switch. Now, to be honest, it's still RF. Like the phrase garbage in, garbage out still applies to the RetroTINK 2X Pro. This is not some kind of magic box that is going to make a console over RF or composite suddenly look like it's an RGB. What it does do is allow you to properly display those systems on an HDTV at the proper aspect ratio, and in my opinion makes them quite playable. If you're gonna sit up really close to the TV and like pixel peep, yeah, it's not gonna look that great. But if you move your chair back to what would be like a normal viewing or playing distance, you can tell from that distance that you're not playing in RGB, but it still looks fine. It doesn't, in my opinion, look any worse than playing your system in RF on a TV did back in the day. Moving on to composite video, I'm just going to stick with the NES. So now, instead of having that plugged into a VCR as a middleman, we're just taking the video and audio signals out of the side of the NES and plugging those directly in to the RetroTINK 2X. And it was definitely a noticeable improvement. Composite video is still a noisy source, so it's not going to look perfect if you're used to playing on an emulator, a Raspberry Pi, Mister, or you have an RGB modded system around. But again, at what I would consider to be a normal playing distance, I thought it was fine. I ran through the first few levels of Castlevania, and I had a great time. Next, I wanted to check out S-Video, and for that, I pulled out my Super Nintendo. I just have some cheap S-Video cables that I got, I think, off of either Amazon or eBay. I know you can get much nicer quality cables, I just don't have those. I hooked that up to the RetroTINK 2X, and I'm not exaggerating when I say that I basically had to pick my jaw up off the floor. I've been saying for a long time that I think that the biggest incremental step in video quality across the video spectrum is between composite video and S-Video. And that was absolutely true here. I played Super Mario World, I played some F-Zero, and I played some Super Turrican. And in all cases, I was quite amazed at how good it looked on an HDTV compared to playing that same system over RGB upscaled through an OSSC. Does the OSSC look sharper? Yes. The video signal you're going to get out of RetroTINK is a little bit softer, but it looks a lot better than playing the game over composite on a CRT did. So I was quite impressed. The other system I tried plugging in was my PlayStation over S-Video. Check that out. And I also thought that that looked excellent. That's a system that switches back and forth between 480i and 240p, like the startup sequence that people are so fond of, that brings back memories for all of us on the PlayStation, is in 480i, but most PlayStation games are going to be in 240p. And again, I thought it looked excellent. One thing I forgot to mention earlier, I'll just mention, make sure you've got your TV in some kind of game mode so that you get the lowest lag experience you can. And with any of these, you're going to want to maybe mess with the settings on your TV. Like if you can make a custom video preset for playing games through the RetroTINK on your TV, which is what I did, that would be the best thing to do. For component video, I got out my PlayStation 2, and the game I played was SSX. Most PlayStation 2 games display in 480i, and most HDTVs are 480i compatible, which means that for games like that, you don't need something like the RetroTINK 2X. But there are some PlayStation 2 games that display in 240p, which your TV is not going to get along with. But by using the RetroTINK 2X when playing a 480i game, you can take advantage of something like the smoothing filter, which, like I said, looks a little bit better. And again, if you have a game that's switching resolutions between 240p and 480i, and you're not using something like the RetroTINK 2X, your TV is not going to be a happy camper. Before we wrap up the conversation on using the RetroTINK 2X for video games, I wanted to just quickly touch on using it as an interface between video game consoles and a capture device. If you are capturing gameplay footage for a YouTube show, or maybe you're like a Twitch streamer, you can definitely use this for that. The caveats are, again, garbage in, garbage out. Don't expect RGB quality video capture when you're using this to play Nintendo over composite video. You need to make sure that your capture card supports 480p. And another thing to keep in mind is that a lot of capture devices will already allow you to input composite S-Video or component, which mine does. I tried playing my NES through this and then passing that to my capture card. And I also tried just plugging my NES via composite directly into my capture card. And I can get it to look equally good either way, depending on how I adjust the settings. So I think that's kind of a wash. I captured both Super Nintendo and PlayStation gameplay footage over S-Video, and I will say that that looked quite good just in the capture window, and I could only imagine that it would look a little bit better if I did a little bit of processing or messed with the settings a little bit more to optimize brightness, contrast, and saturation. Although again, the image is going to be a little bit soft because we're not talking about, line quadrupled RGB video. So while the RetroTINK 2X certainly could be part of a capture or streaming chain, I'm not sure I would consider it the best tool for the job. Now, moving on from gaming, I was curious to play with the 2X as a way to play old SD video sources on an HDTV. We already have the VCR pulled out because we were using that as the intermediary between playing a video game via RF and an HDTV. So I wanted to pop in a VHS tape and see what that would be like. The first things I'll say, settings that you're going to want to use on the RetroTINK 2X, or I should say settings that I used. The comb filter, you're going to want to have an auto instead of retro. And I liked having the smoothing filter on because I think it helped cut down on the noise a little bit. And then on the TV, I didn't want to use the same video preset as I used for gaming. I made a separate preset and adjusted the brightness and the contrast and the color accordingly. And I also used a more aggressive noise reduction to try to help make the video signal look its best. And I have to say, I thought it looked quite decent. A big caveat I will say with VHS tapes is that when the tape gets to maybe a little trouble spot, you're going to see the signal cut out on the RetroTINK. It really depends on how good a quality the tape is. If it's a tape that's gotten really worn out, it's not going to be an enjoyable viewing experience. But if it's a tape that's been well taken care of, you shouldn't have a problem at all. I ended up watching Robin Hood in its entirety and didn't have any problems. I think cartoons end up looking a little bit better just for obvious reasons. It's a much more simple picture. I did end up picking up a theatrical live action release. I got one of the Jurassic Park movies. And again, I thought it looked quite decent. Once again, if you sit up close to the TV, it's not going to look perfect. But if you're back at a normal viewing distance, I thought it looked quite decent. The other thing I was interested in plugging in was my LaserDisc player. There are a lot of movies or, anime, things like that were released on LaserDisc that never came out any other way. But it's also just fun to collect LaserDiscs. And one of the big differences between most LaserDisc releases and VHS releases is that generally speaking, LaserDiscs are in a widescreen format, which unless you have a really big CRT TV is not going to look very good. So I ended up getting my copy of Top Gun out, which again is presented in widescreen, but because it's outputting that 4:3 picture, what you end up with is not only black bars on the sides, but black bars on the top and bottom as well. And that doesn't look very good at all. But you can use the zoom feature on your TV to fill the screen. Generally, it's going to fill the screen horizontally, and you still will have a little bit of a black bar on the top and the bottom, just because a lot of theatrical releases are in like ultra wide screen. But much as I did with Robin Hood, I ended up watching Top Gun in its entirety on the LaserDisc, and I thought it looked quite good. Nobody's going to think that you're watching it on Blu-ray or even on DVD, but from a normal viewing distance, I thought it looked good enough. And, I just had fun. It's fun. You have to flip the disc over halfway through the movie. And again, in the same way that, we enjoy playing games on the original cartridges, it's a little bit fun to watch a movie on an older format. So, primarily I would say, most people are going to get this for playing video games. That's really what it's marketed as. But, it's a nice device to just keep permanently hooked up to your TV as a means of easily hooking up older systems without having to worry about it. Whether that is an old video game console or a VCR or LaserDisc player, old computers like Apple IIs, Commodore 64s, and even, the higher price of the Pro at $129, I still think it's worth it. It's still way cheaper than going down the RGB rabbit hole. The price was recently dropped on the OSSC because now an upgraded OSSC has come out. And I want to say the OSSC is now down to about $129. But one thing you have to keep in mind is you're still going to have to buy SCART RGB cables for all of your systems, which can be as high as $40 a piece, depending on where you get them. And then for systems that don't do RGB, like NES and N64, you're going to have to pay quite a bit of money to have those modded. Now, if you want to do that, that's going to give you the best possible picture, but it's just something you need to go into with your eyes open. So you don't want to just see, oh, the OSSC is only like $130 now, I'm going to grab that, because that is not even half, maybe not even a quarter of what you're going to end up spending if you want to go the RGB route. So for people who just casually want to play their games in their living rooms, maybe watch a movie or two on an older format, the RetroTINK 2X Pro, in my opinion, is a great device. And again, as I said, I think it's probably the most practical solution you're going to find. That's going to do it for this episode of Classic Gaming Quarterly. As always, thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.